How to Manipulate People to Pay You More Than You Deserve. Honoré Balzac, 1799. Born on May of 1799 as a child, Honoré de Balzac was an independent thinker, an enthusiastic reader who read every book and dictionary he could find. But there was a problem. Two problems, actually. First, Balzac had a strong will or stubborn nature, which caused him troubles from high school and throughout his life. The second, Balzac didn't know how to manipulate people. He tried to be a lawyer but failed. He attempted to be a publisher, and when he failed, he borrowed money from his family and friends to start a printing business which also failed. Balzac tried being a businessman, a critic, and even politics, but failed in everything. Almost everything. While Balzac's failures might not be due to one single thing, a particular incident in his life can give us a clue to the reasons why he failed in most things. It happened in the year 1820. A Parisian bookseller, hearing of Balzac as a young writer of outstanding promise, decided to offer him 3,000 francs for his next novel. However, when he found Balzac's address situated in an obscure part of the city, he realized that he was not dealing with a gentleman of fashion, so he dropped his price to 2,000 francs. When he went to the house, saw that the writer was living on the top floor, which was then associated with a low-class individual, he dropped the price another 500 francs. When he entered Balzac's house and found him dipping a bread roll in a glass of water, he eventually dropped his price to 300 francs. Now, in the year 1823, Honoré de Balzac published the book La Dernière Fille. That was the book he sold for 300 francs instead of 3,000 francs, simply because he did not know how to manipulate people to make them pay him what he deserved or even more. To be successful in life, you have to be good at manipulation. And when I say manipulation, I don't mean it in a negative way. For instance, the Cambridge Dictionary defines manipulation as the act of influencing or controlling someone or something to your advantage, often without anyone knowing it. Think of positive manipulation the way you think about makeup. When a woman wears makeup, she's being manipulative, but it's a positive manipulation. When you put on your best suit and perfume for a business meeting, that's being manipulative. When we speak with someone we have a crush on and use that calm, cool, sexy voice, that's manipulation.
Excuse me. I know this is completely random, but what were you for Halloween yesterday?
I was Kim Possible.
Kim Possible?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a cartoon?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Did you do any other costumes this year or not?
Well, it's a really simple costume. It's just like a green shirt and jeans. So,
Okay.
You
didn't put like super much effort into it?
No, I literally have the clothes already.
I got you.
Yeah.
Positive manipulation is very important for your success because, let's face it, nobody will ever judge you, like you, or choose you for who you are. Everybody will judge you for whom they perceive you to be. Nobody will ever buy your product or pay for your service for what it can do or for what it's worth. Everybody will attempt to buy your product or services for what they perceive it to be worth, and their perception is the reality. In their 2020 book, Perception: How Our Bodies Shape Our Minds, University of Virginia psychologists Denise Profits and Drake Bayer write, even though our naive intuitions are that we see the world as it is, we do not. On page 44 of his 1998 book, 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene writes, everything is judged by its appearance. If you don't believe this, two gentlemen, there's a woman you most likely would believe. In a 2009 book, The Trump Card, Playing to Win in Work and Life, Ivanka Trump writes this: perception is more important than reality. If someone perceives something to be true, it is more important than if it is, in fact, true.
Believe me. 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 Believe me.
Listen to this. Humans don't have the capacity to accurately judge your value or the value of your product. We rely on cheap things like your name or the name of your product, how you or your products look, and how we feel when we have contact with you or your business. If you care about being paid how much you deserve, or a little more than that, then you have to understand how to make the world perceive you or your product as being worthy of high fees. So, in this video, I'd like to discuss 3 simple ways you can positively manipulate whoever you're dealing with so that they pay you what you deserve or a little more than that. I'll talk about the first contact, the name, and the look. In the year 1707, 4 ships from a British fleet returning to England struck rocks off the Isles of Sicily. About 2,000 people lost their lives in what is now known as one of the worst naval disasters in history. Bad weather and the mariners' inability to accurately calculate longitude caused the disaster, so 7 years later, in July of 1714, the British Parliament established the Longitude Act. The act included a reward of £20,000, equivalent of over $3 million today, for anyone who discovered a practical way of calculating longitude. By this time, astronomers had provided a means to calculate latitude, so the popular thought was that astronomy would simply provide a means to calculate longitude. But, surprisingly, they couldn't. Instead, a clockmaker by the name of John Harrison was the one who was able to get the work done. In the year 1736, John Harrison's H1 clock was tested at sea. The navigator was amazed by how accurate the H1 was and by how accurately he could calculate longitude. Now, you'll think it's time for John Harrison to get his $3 million, right? Instead of getting his reward, Harrison was asked to produce a more accurate clock. He spent more than 17 years building H2 and even H3 and H4 clocks, taking about 40 years to build. But the board never tested Harrison's clock or paid him his reward. It was in 1773, at age 80, that Harrison's son petitioned the king before he was able to get recognition for his work. The question here is, why? Why was John Harrison denied his recognition even though he sacrificed his time and talent to solve a major problem? Well, the answer is simple. He was not perceived to have qualified for the solution he created. He didn't have the right title. He was not an astronomer or a scientist. He was a clockmaker who was perceived not to have the qualification to solve the kind of problem he solved. The moral of this story is this: people will underpay you for your solution if they don't perceive you to be qualified for such a solution. To deal with this, you have to understand positive manipulation. So, if tomorrow you found yourself in the shoes of John Harrison, even though you know how to solve such a problem, you'll do better to negotiate for such deals in the name of a company, or in partnership with some astronomers, scientists, or other people your clients perceive to qualify for the solution. So, for example, let's say you are about to negotiate for an engineering project and you don't have a degree in engineering. You can't just depend on your 3 decades of superior experience in the field. The law of first contact suggests that you'll increase your chance of getting that contract or getting paid, well, if you go to the negotiation table with 2 or 3 people who have some degrees in engineering as your partners. Let's use another example. I started an agri-tech company in the year 2016, even though I was never a farmer. Do you know what I did? I had a partnership deal with about 250 farmers in my country, registered a company, and chose a nice domain name, agricexperts.com, then brought all these experts under the umbrella of my company. As a result of that, I was able to get a contract from the richest state of my country, Lagos State, got hundreds of people to trust and pay well for our services, and ended up meeting the vice president of my country. Don't ever forget this. People won't pay you what you deserve. People won't even pay you for the solution you've created. They'll only pay you as much money as they perceive you're qualified to earn. If you're John Harrison, a clockmaker who has a solution to a scientific problem, you'll never get paid what you deserve, except you know how to make your clients perceive you as being qualified. In his 1597 play, Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare wrote, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Unfortunately, Shakespeare was wrong. It turns out that humans unconsciously judge everything by its name. Your products, services, and even your names are going to be judged, and that perception would directly affect how much someone is willing to pay you. In a study, Albert Mehrabian, an emeritus professor at UCLA, and his team gathered more than 2,000 participants and showed them 2,845 first names. After seeing the names, the participants were then asked their assumptions about the people bearing those names. The study found that merely introducing your name to someone can make them perceive you as intelligent, confident, creative, or stupid. The study found for females bearing names like Elizabeth, Victoria, Kate, or even Susan make people have a positive perception about you, while male names such as Alexander, James, Robert, David, and Stephen are perceived in a positive light. Now you know why I changed my name to Steve. Wait, before you change your name to James or Elizabeth, there are 3 things I have not told you. First, there are so many other names Mehrabian's study found to be favored, which I didn't mention in this video, because I don't want to waste your time. Maybe your name is one of those. The second thing you have to understand about this study is that people give a positive association with names of the people who have some positive influence in their life or the world as a whole. So take, for example, if you love your mother so much and your mother's name is Naomi, and you meet a lady whose name is Naomi, then you might unconsciously transfer the feelings you have about your mother to her.
And you stand before me this day, you joined in marriage to this woman who stands by your side?
Hang on. Yeah, I do.
Now you know I had nothing to do with that.
Another example is that of Alexander and Elizabeth. When people hear Alexander, they remember Alexander the Great. And Elizabeth reminds people of Queen Elizabeth. People don't just judge your name or the names of your product, they judge even how the name sounds. In 1929, a German psychologist named Wolfgang Koelier wanted to know if people give meaning to something simply by the way the name sounds. In psychological experiments first conducted on the island of Tenerife, Wolfgang lied to his participants that 2 names, Bulba and Kiki, belonged to certain 2 objects or shapes. Even though those names didn't exist, 90% of people associated Kiki with the shape on the left. Wolfgang named this phenomenon as Bulba-Kiki effect, which simply means even if people don't know what your name or product name means, just by the way those names sound, people can easily associate your brand either positive or negative feelings. In his 1954 book, The Door of Perception, Aldous Huxley wrote, "In a world where education is predominantly verbal, highly educated people find it all but impossible to pay serious attention to anything but words, and notions ignored. In other words, humans judge everything by the most unreasonable standards." In his 1932 book, Scientific Advertising, Claude C. Hopkins wrote, "There is a great advantage in a name that tells a story." In that same book, Hopkins dedicated an entire chapter 20 actually, to talk about the importance of the name to business success. So, whether you like it or not, people make a sharp, unreasonable judgment about you, your business, or your product, just from the name. As a teacher of positive manipulation, what I will advise you to do is to pay attention to how your name or your business, your product, services, and maybe even yourself sound. So, here are some tips. First, if you can name your product or business after a historical figure we all like, that can be a good thing. Tesla is a good example. Second, if you can name your product after a particular thing we see and talk about every day, that can make you memorable. Think about Apple Computer. If you can name your business or product discriminately after a certain group, such a group would love you for it. For example, there's a radio in my city called Women's Radio. If you can't do any of the above, studies suggest that if you choose simple, easy-to-remember names, you should be fine. When Apple released the Apple I on April 11, 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak probably thought they would sell millions of copies of Apple I. But the product failed. Just 200 pieces of it were ever produced, so they had to beg around for money to finance the next project, Apple II. That's when they met a man named Mike Markkula. Markkula had some money to invest, and he did invest $250,000 in Apple. This money helped Steve Jobs and his team build Apple II. But beyond the money Mike Markkula invested in Apple, there's a particular lesson he taught Steve Jobs, which will be reasonable for Apple's success. In Steve Jobs' official biography, Walter Isaacson writes, "Early on, Mike Markkula had taught Jobs to impute, to understand that people do judge a book by its cover, and therefore to make sure all the trappings and packaging of Apple signaled that there was a beautiful gem inside." Because of this advice, Steve Jobs didn't just pay attention to what is inside Apple's products, but also what he named the products and how the outside and the packaging of the products looked.
Boy, I've forgotten how much work it actually is to start a company. It's a lot of work. And you've got to do everything. You've got to come up with a name. You've got to come up with a logo. In addition to designing the product, you've got to figure out what to design. You've got to figure out how you're going to get it to the marketplace. You've got to do a part number system. You've got to go get bank accounts. You've got to set up charts, general ledgers, get a management information system, get a little kitchen set up, get a coffee maker, all this stuff.
Even though Honoré de Balzac was a good writer who deserved to be paid well, he was paid poorly because he didn't understand how to make people perceive him as a good writer. Even though John Harrison solved a problem that could save thousands of lives, he was not paid or recognized for his talent because he was not perceived to be qualified for the solution. If Steve Jobs had not learned how to name, package, and brand his products, it doesn't matter how good Apple products are, nobody would pay a premium for them. Creating a good product or service is good, but that's just half of your work. Becoming a competent, skillful individual is good, but that's just half of your work. If you want to be paid how much you deserve or even a little more, you have to understand the art of positive manipulation. You must pay attention to how you name your products, services, company, or even yourself. You have to pay great attention to the design of your website, the color you paint your office, the design and packaging of your books, products, and every single thing the world will see about you or your business. The way you dress might be different from one situation to another, depending on who you're having a meeting with. Probably half of your energy should be dedicated to how the world perceives you and your product because, in the real sense of it, you'll only be paid how much the other person perceives you to be worth. In his 2016 book, Autobiography of God, Abhijit Naskar writes, "Often your brain makes you believe what you see is truly real, even when it's not." Steve Younger said, "Perception is reality. If you're perceived to be something, you might as well be it, because that's the truth in people's minds."